Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. Hold on, somebody's texting me. What was I saying? Oh yeah, welcome back. And it's Sunday school, isn't it? That means we're going to talk philosophy and theology. So I've had a couple ideas, and I know we've had a number of guests on Sunday school recently, but it's just me today, folks. You're just stuck with me. Of some segments or some series I wanted to do with this. As many of you know, I am currently in a position of some great esteem. I have been formally, I don't want to say ordained, that's certainly not the right word, formally formalized as a Sunday school teacher. That's right. Congratulations, Pat. I teach fourth graders who are remarkably astute. And I guess I just had the wrong impression of fourth graders because I think back to how I was in the fourth grade, which was just a diabolical miscreant. And these kids are great. They're awesome. And I am in charge of teaching them specifically the Ten Commandments, Beatitudes, and so on. But this is good because my whole sort of love interest in philosophy and part of my specialty in my master's program is moral philosophy. Moral philosophy and natural theology are probably the two greatest points of interest for me. So one cool thing that I've been doing with these fourth graders is just like going deep on all this stuff, and not, I want to give them a good, proper understanding of how moral philosophy should and ought to be done, because people are so morally confused these days. It's interesting, it's weird, and it's at some parts, I would often say at a lot of parts, very alarming how because there's two things that we start off in moral philosophy with when it's done well, I would argue. One is that we all know morality. It's all sort of part of our basic, these are intuitions that are occasioned to us, that we have this inherent sense of right and wrong and good and bad. We can all know it, but that's only the first part. The second part is that we can all deny it. We can all distort it. We can all try to run away from it. And it's the tension between these two that good moral philosophy is done and tries to make sense of. What is that first one? What are these intuitions pointing at? Are they pointing at something above and beyond ourselves, at some really objective source or foundation of morality? I would argue, obviously, yes, they are. These are not; these intuitions are not mere illusions fobbed off by the socio-bioevolutionary process. Whatever your views on evolution, it's sort of irrelevant to the discussion of morality, because say you, however you think humans came about, the question is morality something that we discover, or is morality something that we invent? That's the question. Now, I would argue, rightly, if I may. That it's something that we discover, and we all know it's something that we discover. This is a very intuitive, basic belief. Now, I think that can be argued out as well, and I have argued it out on many episodes before. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you argue it through, you get to a what's called a moral monotheism. It doesn't give you the Christian religion necessarily, but it gets you to a philosophical picture that's certainly and absolutely compatible with the Christian religion, just through deep armchair moral philosophy alone. It's a really good argument. It's a serious argument. It's one that ultimately helped to bring me out of a state of atheism and agnosticism and push me to ultimately becoming a convert to Christianity and the Catholic faith. Is a good study of moral philosophy, and I think anybody who's consistent and honest and open with the study of moral philosophy will tend in that direction. I think you have to lean very much into point two to escape that. And point two is that we're all very good at denying the moral law or trying to run away from it or distort it. And indeed, we see this among people daily, but also professional ethicists all the time. I mean, you have some really bizarre people in academia promoting some just absolutely abhorrent beliefs. I mean, everything from trying to justify morally infanticide, to like the most crude and barbaric forms of utilitarianism that you can imagine. Now, I would argue that utilitarianism is barbaric to begin with, and that just because some people draw the line, a little closer to sanity, based on what we know to be true about right and wrong, and some people draw it a lot further away, is merely just an arbitrary discrimination. If you're going to be a utilitarian, then there's really, you can draw the line wherever you want. By the way, it ultimately comes down to this for people who aren't totally familiar with these jargons. Utilitarianism really is looking at a sort of consequences effect of morality. What is the utility we can get out of certain human decision makings? And then this will try to, on a basic level, define persons by what they can do rather than what they are. Now, natural law theory, which I subscribe to, rejects this through and through, that we have our dignity as humans based on what we are, not what we can do, meaning that we are no less persons, that we are no less morally valuable. We have higher intelligence or lower intelligence, whether we have one skin color or a different skin, whether we're shorter or taller, whether we're conscious or unconscious, whether we're young or old, it doesn't matter. We have dignity by what we are, not what we can do. Utilitarianism is a really shoddy philosophy, because it bases your worth, a human's worth, based on what they can do, and some utilitarians will place that worth in areas that are a little bit more frightening or alarming than other utilitarians. But I would say we really have to see the philosophy as a whole as frightening and alarming, not just the specific instances of it. And it's based on that very specific discrimination against where do we get value as humans. Is it by who we are, intrinsically, formally, as made in the image and likeness of God? Is that it, or is it just a mere function of? Is that it, or is it just a mere function of prudential worth, so to speak? Like, are we valuable just because we can, provide for society, or that we can feel pain, or that we have a certain degree of intelligence, or, however you want to define it, it's almost always arbitrary. And utilitarianism is a sick philosophy. It really is, and it rebels against pretty much every basic moral intuition. But, secularists will be secularists, and they'll do anything they can to try and hold on to morality without trying to bring God back into it. And it's a futile thing. It's a dangerous thing, and this is why you have, these people like Peter Singer out there in the world, who just promote as acceptable these deeply immoral behaviors, and everybody knows that it's deeply immoral. You can't escape it. You can deny it. You can live in a sense of denial. You can pretend like you think this is right, but everybody knows that it's wrong. You can't escape these basic moral intuitionism is hardly any better. It often turns into a form of utilitarianism. It's sort of a disguised utilitarianism, but I would argue it's also arbitrary. From a totally secular viewpoint, why should humans be of any higher worth or dignity than anything else on the planet? That's the question you have to answer, and you cannot answer from a secular viewpoint. You can't. From that viewpoint, from a naturalistic or atheistic viewpoint, there is nothing special about humans. We're just slightly more evolved apes hurling through space on an infinitesimal speck of dust, doomed to both individual and collective oblivion. There's absolutely nothing special about humans on that worldview. Fortunately, that worldview is wrong, so it should be rejected. And we all know intuitively there is intrinsic worth to every single human being. We all know it. It's what we can't not know, but it's what we can all also deny. Great book recommendation for anybody who are into moral philosophy. I just actually said it. The name of the book. It's called "What You Can" or "What We Can't Not Know." What you can't know. What the heck one is it? Is it "What You Can't Not Know" or "What We Can't Not Know"? It's one of those two. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up the old Kindle here. It's been a while since I read it, but it's by a great moral philosopher who was once a deep atheistic secular philosopher. Got serious about studying morality. Realized that only natural law theory makes sense. I'm condensing the story, obviously, and completely revised his views on everything, and now does a wonderful job of teaching and instructing natural law theory. His name is Jay Budziewski. Very difficult name to pronounce. It's What We Can't Not Know. Not What You Can't. What We Can't Not Know by Jay Budziewski. It's a great work of an introduction to natural law theory. Very well written, very accessible. Without being diluted either. So I would highly recommend What We Can't Not Know by Jay Budziewski. Been trying to get him on the podcast. No success so far. I don't get everybody I want. That's the truth. I get most people I want, but I don't get everybody I want. Let me have a sip of my kombucha. So anyway, what I want to start doing is a series on the Ten Commandments, similar to what I'm doing with my little chickens over at Sunday school. And because there's so much richness here, and the Ten Commandments are sort of a specific explanation or delineation, if you can, of things we all do intuitively know anyways. So it's not like, you hear this old thing, was it wrong for Cain to kill Abel before Moses brought down the Ten Commandments? The answer is no, because we have natural law. God wrote the moral law on our hearts. It's what we can't not know. But the Ten Commandments give us specific delineation, and there's so much we can get out and should get out of the Ten Commandments. It's not, people kind of, everything gets caricatured, of course, when it comes to religion. And I used to think of that the same way. I used to, laugh and scoff it all off. Obviously, my positions have changed on this quite substantially. So what I'm going to propose to you is that you can not only learn a tremendous amount about natural law theory by just studying the Ten Commandments specifically, but you can also start to develop a blueprint for your own flourishing. This is a point that I emphasize so much. Morality, when properly understood, isn't about God just setting down some arbitrary set of rules to ruin you from having a good time. That's not what it is, right? Morality, properly understood, is a blueprint for human flourishing. Here's the way to think about it. There are some things in this world that are objectively good for us by our nature, by our teleology, what humans are for. There are certain things that are better for us than other things. Whether or not we want those things, whether or not we pursue those things, that is just the truth. Morality is trying to help us to better understand what really is good for us, objectively, not subjectively, right? And we, again, this is something we all know is true. Forget this wishy-washy postmodernist nonsense of things being good just because you desire them. We all know that that's false. We all know that that's just a preposterous, silly lie. Look, I don't care how much you want to do heroin. It ain't good for you. Trust me. It's just right, and we all know it, right? Now, it's a shame we even have to use extreme examples to draw this point out, but so long as you can give even just one example like that where we can all agree, it doesn't matter how much somebody thinks heroin is good for them or thinks that this addictive behavior, it's just not. It's clearly not. That goes to show that things aren't good just because you desire them or want them. Some things are really good for you. Other things aren't. So what natural law theory helps us to do is not only develop a sort of civility that will promote the good of society, the good of the other person, willing, which is the Christian definition of love, agape, an unreserved willing of the good for the other person because they are the other person. That's what love is on the most fundamental level, the type of love that God has for us. It's not like a snuggly romantic type of love, eros or storge or philia. Agape, willing the good of the other for other. Natural law theory not only helps us to develop that, which will promote the good of society, which is love on that fundamental level, but will also promote what is good for us intrinsically as humans, to come in line with what is really good for us, what will cause us to flourish and be most the kinds of creatures we are. So we can work through this with natural law theory, and natural law theory is looking sort of at the proximate foundations, if you will, for morality. What are the ends? What is the teleology? What is the final cause of certain things? When we can understand what things are pointed at or directed towards, we can figure out what is really good for that thing. Now, ultimately, we have the ultimate cause or foundation of it, which is God, but we can figure out a lot just proximately. without just saying, well, God said this or God said that, meaning apart from revelation. That's what I'm saying. Just through deep armchair, good, consistent thinking about the nature of things, philosophically, we can build out a very rigorous, very healthy theory that will help us to flourish and individually and collectively. Now, all that is supported ontologically by God, and it's not only perfectly compatible with revelation and Scripture, but revelation and Scripture can illuminate a lot of it. It can shed new light onto it. It can help us to better understand it, especially in certain instances. So that's why I really like, again, with my little chickens of Sunday school, talking natural law theory, but then also understanding it in light of the Ten Commandments, which can really help to bring out a lot of the basic principles. That's the series we're going to start. We're actually going to start it this week. So I'm calling it the 10 Commandments in 10 minutes. My hope is that every week we'll do a new commandment. We'll give you a 10-minute overview, and this is just the introduction, so I hope you get a lot out of it. I've rambled on for about 15 minutes now, but we'll have 2 episodes today, so this is the introduction to the series, 10 Commandments in 10 minutes, and then the first one will go right into the first commandment, and what we'll do is when we work on the specifics of the commandment, we'll teach something about natural law theory as well. So I hope you enjoy this series. I think you'll get a lot out of it. So cool. And it'll be interesting if nothing else because moral questions are really fun and we can throw in some hard cases and stuff like that too. So hit subscribe, share this episode with both of your friends, and just listen to the immediate one after this because we're starting it right away. Okay, back to the 10 Commandments in 10 minutes. We are on to our very first commandment, folks. And this is the big one. This is the important one. So, if you haven't listened to the introductory episode which preceded this, please do, because what I want to do is not only dive into the 10 Commandments, but also explore natural law theory as well. Because, as I explained previously, when it comes to morality, we all know right from wrong. We have this quite effective moral intuition. It's not infallible, but it's generally reliable. Unfortunately, we're all very good at denying it. We're all very good at rationalizing. We're all very good at running away from it. And that's not good for us. The point of morality is to align our will with what is really good for us. Now, natural law theory can help us sort that out. It helps us to reaffirm what we already know, help to discern difficult cases. That's why moral education is important. It's not that... people sometimes think that there's this paradox with natural law theory. Well, if we already know it, then why do we need to be educated? Well, sometimes we have to reaffirm things. We have to build upon this basic foundation to know more about it. Second off, it doesn't tell us everything we need to know. It just gives us a sort of general working intuition that can be relied upon, but is not perfect. So there's certain things we still have to work out. And then it's something that can be worked out irrespective of revelation, meaning natural law theory is what can we know about what is really good for us morally from just approximate view of things, just by looking at the directedness or teleology or final cause of human beings in general. What are we for? What kind of creatures are we? Now, ultimately, we need the ontological support in the transcendence, in God, to bring us from the is to the ought, for example. But furthermore, what you realize through natural law theory, a study of this, is you get a moral monotheism that is wholly compatible with Scripture and is further illuminated by divine revelation. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. Revelation gives us very specific instances, examples, applications of moral law theory, and we're going to go through the Decalogue or the 10 Commandments, which is a wonderful overview, which has way more depth than most people initially seem, certainly more than I initially thought. And then what we can do is we can start to unpack some of the natural law principles found within. Okay, so we said this would be 10 minutes. We have to be somewhat quick. So the first commandment, let me read it to you, and then I'll try and do my best Charlton Heston voice. I am the Lord your God. That's do it normally. So, first commandment. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God, and a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's from the book of Deuteronomy. So, how do we start to look at this, and how can we think of it both from a biblical perspective and a natural law perspective? Well, when we're looking at the Ten Commandments, the first thing to understand is that the first three commandments really have to do with our relationship to God. And in natural law, one of the basic moral principles that we all understand is this sort of sense of justice or fair play. We have this intuition that we should really give to people what they are owed, what is due to them. And the first commandment certainly is drawing on that basic moral intuition. Because when we understand that there's a sense of justice or fair play, that there's something good about giving people what is due to them or what they are owed, then we have to think about, well, what is God owed? What is just and right to give to God? And there's really essentially three things there. One is worship, certainly above all, but then we also should have loyalty and obedience. So worship, loyalty, and obedience are really the three things that are owed to God. And the first commandment helps us to understand that. Now, here's the thing to get right about this, and people sometimes get the languaging confused because, jealous God or this or that, which is a very superficial reading of the text. We don't give these things to God because God needs them. We give these things to God because we need them. This is what's good for us. We don't add a single thing to God's perfection by worshiping him or obeying him or being loyal to him. That doesn't make God any more perfect or anything like that. Rather, we are set up in such a way that by being just creatures, by giving people what they are owed, by adhering to this natural law of fair play, we flourish. We become more the kinds of creatures that we are supposed to be. We are all endowed with this sort of intrinsic ability to express gratitude, and we know that gratitude is really good for us. In fact, virtually all psychologists recognize the value in just making daily acts of gratitude, keeping a gratitude journal, for example. Incredibly positive and beneficial psychological effects. Now, just because something is practically useful doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but in this case, I think that it is. We are set up in a way to flourish from being grateful and reflecting on that and expressing that. Well, all the much more powerful and glorious when we aim that gratitude most properly toward the one who created us, who gave us existence, who gave us literally everything. God is more deserving of gratitude than anything or anybody else. So it is deeply good for us in so many ways, and deeply right and deeply just, to express this gratitude by God, to make sure that we're not putting anything else in God's place that isn't God. Now, it's very important to realize that when we're talking about loyalty, worship, and obedience to God, we're not just talking about replacing the one true God with like a Thor or a Zeus, but making sure that we're not holding something in the ultimate as our ultimate commitment, as our ultimate priority that isn't God. And this is where I talk to my Sunday school kids, my little chickens as I call them. Like, if you're putting like football as like, if football is your religion, then you're violating the first commandment, right? If you're going to football games rather than worship, we've got a problem here, man. Like, that's not a good thing. There's a disorder there. That's so much of morality is about trying to fix disorders. We have unfortunately a sort of disordered will, or a will that is very much prone to becoming disordered. And part of natural law theory, obviously, the Ten Commandments is to help us know what is really good for us. What is really good for us is to make sure that God is in his proper place, that he is a being worthy of worship, and he gets that worship, that loyalty, that gratitude, that obedience, so on and so forth. So yeah, and this is what always happens, right? If somebody knocks God away, if somebody either denies God or tries to become an atheist or an agnostic, something else takes that place. Maybe that something is football, maybe it's politics, maybe it's sex, maybe it's gambling. But whatever it is, that is not what they should be having as their ultimate commitment. That's not what's good for them. So it creates a very disordered behavior, a very unhealthy behavior. And it's only when we hold God as the proper ultimate commitment that we follow the first commandment, and that all of these acts of worship, loyalty, obedience, and gratitude are properly directed in such a way that it is returned to us. When we follow the moral law, we are rewarded. That's how we flourish. That's how we become most the kinds of creatures that we are. So again, it's a very superficial, caricatured view to think that God needs us to worship him because he's insecure. So that's a stupid way to think about it. No serious moral philosopher or theologian thinks that way. Rather, what we recognize is that we are designed as creatures, that morality is the blueprint for our happiness. And Aquinas was so good on this, right? We cannot achieve perfect happiness on this earth, right? Perfect happiness is reserved for the next life. But we can get a lot closer on this earth. We can achieve, he would call it imperfect happiness. And the way to do that is to follow the natural law, follow God's commandments, develop the virtues, virtue ethics, so on and so forth. So the first commandment really builds off of this sort of very basic moral intuition of fair play, justice, giving people what they deserve. We're just past the 10-minute mark, so we have to wrap this up here. But specifically, the instance being revealed here is our relationship to God. So hope this was helpful. Please do subscribe.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.